Buenos días.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start by announcing that our experts this morning have very kindly agreed to try to confine their speeches, keep their speeches reasonably short so that we have at least 10 minutes left over for questions from the floor. That's very helpful. And we'll go straight on to the topics on today's agenda. After a very fruitful day yesterday in which we heard the political authorities, the representatives of the French-speaking world, representatives of the European institutions, and the heads of interpreting departments in various international organisations who spoke to us about the reasons for multilingualism and of the need to train new generations of language specialists, and in particular, of course, conference interpreters, so that we can continue to maintain multilingualism in the future. So today we will turn to the world of research and academia. And we will start by taking a step into the fascinating world of new technologies, and subsequently, with Professor Weibel's kind permission, we will come on to the most perfect example of that we have, and that is our brain. So, without further ado, let me give the floor to Dr. Weibel, who is a professor at the University of Karlsruhe in Germany, plus Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh in the US. And as some of you will know, he is a leading expert on the world stage in machine interpretation. So we'll give him the floor without further ado. Thank you very much.
Vice President Martinez, Director General Olga Cosmidu, and Director Juan Carlos Jimenez Marin. It's, of course, a wonderful opportunity and a great pleasure to be here and talk to you all. It's just such an impressive crowd and group to be giving this presentation to. We also had last week the chance to visit the Parliament and watch what you are doing here as far as translation is concerned. I'm extremely impressed with the work of the human translators here in this Parliament as they, I apologize, interpreters, as they interpret language and speech into 24 languages of the world. It's an incredible ability to do that, and I speak 5 languages, but I would not be able to do this job for 3 minutes, as the concentration and fluency of the work that these interpreters are doing is a fascinating human ability. So what I will walk you through today is, I preface my talk already with this, is in no means intended to replace, and indeed you will see it will be impossible to replace the work of human interpreters. It's an incredible ability, and so what I will be talking to you about is technologies that can be applied for the rest of us. We have to remember the dream in Europe and indeed in the world is for all of us to communicate and understand each other regardless of the language. In most situations, we cannot possibly go through the effort and the expense that we can afford in the European Parliament. Now, with this, let me begin my talk. It is, of course, well understood in this crowd that we are living in a global village. We do work together, and increasingly the world is globalizing. We practice exchange and communication, and in Europe in particular, it is a mandate for all of Europe to integrate regardless of language separation. Now, on one side, there might be some who might argue we should just all speak the same language, but at the same time, there's an opposing trend that insists on the cultural diversity, on the beauty, identity, language, culture, and custom of each language and each country. And that pride in the individualism must be understood if we want to reach the hearts and minds of our brothers and our sisters worldwide. And that presents the challenge. How do we achieve this global village while at the same time not ignoring our cultural identities? Now, no other place in the world understands us as well as Europe, with 24 languages by last count, plus many dialects. It is, of course, a daunting challenge to do this and to achieve this type of integration. Currently, it's done by human translation, or it's not done at all. Most of the conferences I attend are all in broken English. Now, if you look at how well people speak English in Europe, for those of you who believe that switching to English is the solution, I invite you to look at this slide where you see that across the different countries in Europe, only an average about 30 to 40% of people speak English well enough that they could conduct business with each other. So we have to dismiss this as a solution, and indeed it's probably not desirable to do that anyway. Now, what else can we do? Now, of course, there's human interpretation and translation. There's currently about 500,000 translators worldwide. 150,000 of them work in Europe. These are numbers you might correct me with, but this is our research. It's already about a $31 billion market, and the EU is one of the largest, spending 1.3 billion euro on translation and interpretation. Around the world, as impressive as it is with 24 languages, it pales with the challenge worldwide. There are 6,000 languages roughly in the world, and if you wanted to have everyone translated to everyone in the planet, you would have to provide 36 million translation directions. Indeed, that's impossible. So thus, it is only a small fraction of what could be translated that is actually being translated or interpreted. And this is just text. For speech, of course, the situation is worse. There are about 300,000 conferences per year in Europe. 1% or less are interpreted, actually, by human interpreter. On YouTube, every minute, 13 hours of new videos come online. We have television that reaches satellite television that reaches every part of the world. Lectures, governments, universities, corporations all produce speech in a constant pace. And meetings, telephone conversations, travel, dialogue, and encounters, all are events where we speak with each other, and indeed we can't usually do it in each other's languages. So what can be done? I believe that it is an enormous challenge that cannot be met alone by human effort alone, and this is where we have devoted a large part of our time, effort, and money to come up with automatic solutions. So can technology provide a solution? It is, of course, a very difficult effort to do translation or interpretation of speech from one language to the other. For more than 20 years, we're now working on this problem, and the problem roughly involves 3 different steps in 2 directions. If I want to speak or interpret from English into Spanish, the first thing I need is a speech recognition system that converts the spoken word into text. The second module will be a translation system that converts the text from English into text into Spanish. And then on the other side, I need a system that pronounces the Spanish text in Spanish speech so that the counterpart can hear it. When that other person wants to respond, once again, we need Spanish speech recognition, translation from Spanish into English, and text-to-speech synthesis in English. Now, this has been work for many, many years, and it is only recently, in the last 10 years, that increasingly we have even understood that programming such systems is impossible due to the large number of rules that would be necessary to understand human language. Therefore, all modern methods really resort to automatic learning techniques. Our machines that I will present you today are all automatically trained by learning machines on data that has become available. The Internet increasingly makes large volumes of data available. So we can go to the Internet, we can collect data worldwide to provide or to produce data based on which we can train the systems. We collect speech data and we collect translation data, and with that data, our learning machines constantly learn and improve to do this task. I will not bore you with the details of how these models work, but think of them as dictionaries and then also contextual memories, or language models as we call them, that collect statistics such that we can increasingly learn how words are translated and how they are used in context in each of the situations we might encounter. So with these techniques, we have gone through a 4-phase research agenda. In the early 90s, late 80s, we came out with the very first systems that showed feasibility of such systems. Our early system, Janus, was the first in Europe, where you could speak a sentence from 200 possible sentences. It would take 5 minutes to do this, and finally you would get a sentence on the other side, but you would have to make sure that your sentence was syntactically correct and was limited to 100 or 200 word vocabulary. Clearly not very practical. In the next 10 years, we worked on producing spontaneous systems. When people speak, they can stay limited to a particular domain, but they cannot be limited to vocabulary and cannot be limited to speaking style. We constantly hesitate and interrupt ourselves. We go and and produce all kinds of hesitations. All of these must be handled. Luckily, out of this emerged 2 directions, which we now finally are in a position to apply in the real world. One is mobile consecutive interpretation devices that are mobile and therefore can be carried along. These are important for travelers, for humanitarian missions, for healthcare providers, for police and military, for various parts of the government where people are in a mobile situation and have to go out into the field. The second that I will also present you is simultaneous interpretation in a more stationary environment. Think broadcast news or university lectures or government speeches and so on. Let me begin with the first of those 2, which is mobile consecutive interpretation. What you want to do is you are in the field somewhere out there and you want to speak your sentence in your language, and you want to have that system translated or interpreted into the other language, and then allow the other person to answer in their language and speak back to you. This is something we do to great extent for humanitarian missions, where it's currently or has been done before with human interpreters, but very often they are not available when you're in a crisis area of the world, and thus charts and dictionaries are being tried, as you can see in these pictures, but in many ways it is problematic because you cannot get good translation or interpretation out of this. And secondly, sometimes trust and security is in question because you don't know whether the interpreter or translator you can get in the field will in fact give you a translation that is to be believed. So what we have done is we began developing then systems that we both produce for travelers, and we formed a little company that would try to bring that to a portable device that we can all buy and produce and disperse through the app stores. With modern smartphones, you can now download such apps so that everyone can actually download such device, such as software. Our little company and the software we produce is called Jibigo. It's something you can download on your iPhone and on your Android phone. It currently works on 10 languages. We increase it to 15. It has about a 40,000 word vocabulary. And it does not, one of the special things is it does not require the internet. It runs all on the telephone, which is extremely important for healthcare provider, humanitarian providers, military, and so forth, because in the field situation you cannot typically get an internet connection to get a service like that. This is how our system looks like. It's an app that is, as I said, is downloaded on an iPhone or an iPad. You can select the language pair and then you're off to...
I took this amazing trip.
Now, to preface this, Apple liked this so much that they ran, much to our enjoyment, commercials worldwide in the United States, Canada, Australia, and in Japan. And I'll play you one.
I took this amazing trip to Spain after college, and with my iPhone, I checked out hostels before booking them, shared pictures as I went. My mom loved that. And I even downloaded this app, which became my personal translator. Where's the train station?
¿Dónde está la estación de tren?
All I really needed was my iPhone and my passport.
So we were, of course, very happy with this commercial, but so that you see that it really works, I brought you also here my own iPad. It allows you to turn the screen so that you can, in fact, read it better and sit across the table from someone and say, "Hello, it's very nice to meet you."
Bueno, es muy agradable conocerle.
Encantado de conocerles.
Nice to meet you.
I have a problem. I have a cold.
Tengo un problema, que tengo un resfriado.
¿Desde cuándo que lo... sometimes we make mistake. ¿Cuánto tiempo lo han...
How long it?
No hablo español muy bien.
I do not speak Spanish very well,
Pero tengo esta máquina.
but I have this Mackie.
Tengo esta máquina.
I have this Mackie.
Sometimes we make mistakes.
Algunas veces es que
We are making mistakes on occasion.
estamos haciendo errores ubicación.
With this machine, we can describe our problems.
Viene esta máquina que podemos describir problemas.
So with these devices, we have expanded them into different devices, and you see they make mistakes. So one of the things we spend a great deal of effort is to correct those mistakes. Again, we human beings also make mistakes, and one of our fascinating abilities is to recover from errors. You can, these devices, when they make mistakes so that they don't produce bad translations, you can shake them and then the hypothesis disappears. You can type the text if you like, and so on and so forth, to make corrections to the input and to the output. Now, we also learn from those corrections, because every time we make corrections, we get new data based on which our systems continuously get better. Now, we apply these systems also to humanitarian missions. We go every year into 3 different parts of the world. You see here situations where we need such devices, where interpreters are available but not to the extent that we would like them. Here you see one of the doctors that go in one of the exercises in Thailand. This is done with the United States forces together with the Southeast Asian forces, do an exercise every year called Cobra Gold, where medical civil action program is being tested, how to do in civil disasters or in humanitarian disasters, translation on the fly in order to help people in local environments. So we go and try this every year in Thailand. You see here pictures from the Thailand exercises. This is another one in Cambodia, where once again language problems lurk and we need to have translation capability to help people. This is done in a purely humanitarian fashion, where thousands of people are being treated medically every year in order to help do this in a multinational fashion. And again, translation is a key element of that. See here pictures of people in Cambodia. This is another humanitarian organization in Pittsburgh, Shoulder to Shoulder. It's a medical mission to South America in Honduras that a friendly clinic of ours in Pittsburgh is supporting and organizing. And once again, it's staffed by volunteer doctors who typically don't know Spanish, and so they take our devices into the field, as you can see here, to communicate with the patients. Now, all of this is a great deal of effort, and of course we get better in this, and I hope I convinced you that in all of these situations we cannot expect to have a human interpreter always at our disposal. So it is, even though the machines aren't as good as the humans, in those situations, it is essential to have that. And indeed, would we always need to rely on an official voice from the government? We, the people, want to have also translation capability. What I'd like to walk you through now is the second class of applications that we develop, which is simultaneous interpretation. As you see, many other applications do not work in the way that I have just transcribed, where you have a dialogue with another person in another language. If you're watching TV or you have lectures, parliamentary speeches, telephone conversations, meetings, academic lectures, in all these situations, it is a continuous stream of words and sentences. We cannot wait until somebody pushed the button and repeated or said a sentence. Of course, we have a lot of data from the European Parliament where we can build and expand and train such systems. And so we have begun working on these systems that would provide simultaneous interpretation. Now, in university lectures, we have a particular problem. Namely, there we do not have human interpreters, but we do have students who cannot understand German, for example, in our university. And so we are interested in providing tools for such students to be able to follow along in a lecture in German so that they can understand the contents of that lecture. So if you have a person speaking in a language that you do not understand, it is a challenge, and we do want to provide an understanding of the content. Now, the automatic systems will by no means be as good as what the human translators and interpreters can do today. But imagine you're in a country without interpretation services, and you do not understand a word of that language. You'd rather have a system that gives you a little bit of help and a little bit of interpretation so that you can follow along and at least understand the gist of the content of the lecture. Now, our students in Germany tell us that that's a big problem for them. They tell us that they spend more time learning German than they are spending learning the subject that they are there to study. And they have to join courses and learn language before they come. Now, of course, we do not want to discourage them from learning German. In fact, we want to encourage them. But at the same time, there's an international brain drain. We want to make sure that people come to Germany, even though there's a language barrier. Now, we also get funded by the European Commission. We have a project called UBridge, where translation and interpretation services are being developed. This project is being funded by the European Community, and it's supposed to provide such services for the rest of us, for the population. Now, the systems that you see here are systems that have recognition and translation, just like before. But in addition, we have the problem that I don't say period and comma in the middle of my sentence, and the translator needs to first figure out where the end of a sentence is in order to produce a translation. So this continuous monologue produces extra challenges for our translation work. A second problem is also a question of delivery. How do we deliver the output to many people in a room? You all speak different languages and you have headphones on, but it is also possible to produce output by way of directional speakers or heads-up display goggles so that you could someday have your own personal translation device and see the translation as captions in your goggles as well as in the speaker. What we do at the University of Karlsruhe is to produce a system that translates over the internet and uses the internet as a tool to deliver to everyone. So a lecturer comes on and the speech gets transmitted to a server on a computer. On the computer, it is being recognized and translated into the other language and then delivered via a web page. So a student brings their own laptop or their own device, and on that device, they can then follow the transcript and the translation at a personal level. So they can select the output language and then follow along on their own personal device. This is done by way of servers that we install under the project and then can provide such translation and interpretation service in multiple languages. We launched it this summer in Germany on 4 lectures from German into English. Now, we also do other things, like, for example, automatically translating the PowerPoint presentation so that students who do not understand the German PowerPoint presentation can get a translation into English that way. After the lecture is available on a server so that students can listen or read the lecture after it has happened based on the archival version of that lecture. We can provide search and retrieval because the text has been transcribed and translated, so a student can use a keyword and simply enter that keyword and find the lecture that explained that subject matter. Now, there are many challenges for us in research still to make these systems better. First of all, it's a continuous monologue that as I mentioned, there's no periods and no commas in my speech. The speaking style is fast, it's spontaneous, it's fragmentary. We sometimes cough, even sing in lectures. Sometimes we laugh, and all of this has to be treated. Our vocabulary is very special. Of course, in a lecture at an academic level, you will find a lot of terminology. So we have to deal with the many words that might appear in different lectures. And indeed, I was asked by the interpreters in this room to provide my slides and my presentation so that they could prepare for the terminology. It is a problem. We have to adjust our vocabularies, human and machine, in order to handle those special lectures. And then all of this has to happen fast. It is a problem, again, for the human interpreter as well as for the machine to produce this with very little delay so people can follow along in the lecture. German, for us, was a particular challenge. As you know, or those of you who know German know that German has this nasty problem of having the verb at the end. And so sometimes you need to wait for minutes until you know how the story will end. We have the endings in German to account for, and we have these awfully long compound nouns in German which have to be decomposed and treated. So word recognition error rate, which is 4 words in English, is 1 word in German. We also have these special words, as I said, terminologies for a particular technical lecture. We have to deal with formulas. If somebody is speaking a formula, you don't want it to see it written out, but you want to see the formula. And of course, there's ambiguities. The word Vorzeichen in German is translated into sign. It's the minus sign or plus sign, but it can also mean omen. And in a mathematical lecture to talk about omens, it's not a particularly good translation. Now, in the lecture also, we have a great deal of problems that English words sneak into another language. So we talk about iPhones and iPads and lasers, and all of them are pronounced in a German lecture the English way, and therefore are generating problem. And then when we talk in German about downloading something, that English word also gets declinated in a German way. So we say to have downloaded a file, and we mix up the languages like this. So it's an enormous challenge, what we constantly do with languages, and for the machines as well as for the human interpreters, it's a constant adaptation and growth in terms of handling this. Some of this for the machine we use by a constant challenge of adaptation and readaptation of the systems. We too use the PowerPoint slides of the presenter. Our computers use the PowerPoint slides to find all the terminology in the PowerPoint slides. With the terminology, we exercise and we do a search in the internet for similar documents, and from those documents then we produce all the words for that particular system that needs to be run in that situation. Now, the biggest challenge, of course, is how we go from this to 6,000 languages in the world. There we're doing a lot of research in trying to make this whole process cheaper, to lower the cost, and to make it more efficient to build new systems, even for under-resourced languages. So let me come to a conclusion. I'm getting the signal that I'm out of time. So let me make a few points. Is interpretation by machine possible? We believe it is. The performance of these systems will continue to improve. They run and learn from internet data, so the more data there is on the internet, the better the systems will become. And there is plentifully data available on the internet. Are we replacing human interpreters? I say a passionately no. Machine translation quality remains much worse than human performance, and it clearly lacks the human judgment and intuition about what it is we're talking about. Nevertheless, this is not a competition between human and machine. It is about the rest of us. The rest of us do not have the luxury and the opportunity to get to enjoy the wonderful translation and interpretation services that you have. And so, in most cases, the practical reality that it is either poor English or no communication at all. And that generates a social challenge. Do we want to go to the Middle Ages, where only the educated can understand what the government and what the church says? No, we would clearly want to have a translation for all of us and for ourselves. Are we hindering human language learning? We also know for a fact that that's not the case, as people reach out and, in fact, listen to what another person has to say. We begin to be motivated and have an interest to learn another language. And indeed, we notice that some of our translation devices are used by people to actually learn that other language. So we have to recall the mission. The mission is to create a multilingual understanding and integration for all. We need to maintain and nurture language diversity and our cultural heritage. And Europe must provide for its own effective support. We do not want to outsource this to other services or companies, but we do have to provide that service. We can only achieve this if we embrace and integrate both human and machine support. And we like to emphasize this, that it is really both of these efforts that is necessary. And as such, we believe that we need to achieve symbiotic, scalable solutions by language services that complement and magnify human effort with machine support. So again, with this I conclude. I hope I have given you a little bit of a glimpse of what is to come, and that it is in fact in the symbiosis that we find the answer. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Dr.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Weibel. Now, let me first say that the Vice President apologises, but unfortunately had to leave. He couldn't spend any more time with us. So now you have the floor if you wish to ask a question or make a comment. And hopefully the Amaki, as it was called in Spanish, is working, and perhaps it'll be able to translate your questions. Anyway, this is the time if you want to speak.
Thank you very much for a fascinating talk. I have a question on anticipation. You know, you mentioned for verb final languages like German, and in Turkish it's even worse because you need to add everything to that verb. Did I get it correctly? You said 1 word for German and 4 words for English. Can you expand a little on that?
Yes, that's the compounding problem. And in German, we generate these long words. You know, the famous joke is the Donaudampfschifffahrtsgesellschaftskapitän, which is the captain of the company that operates ships on the Donau River. It's all one word in German. And for those of you who know German, you know what a challenge it is, because it is also declinated inside, so we have to actually decompose it and then figure out what the translation is in the other language. Now, Turkish, of course, has a very rich morphology, so it is a gigantic problem. We do this with morphemic analyzers that decompose the words, or indeed phrases. In Japanese we have that, in Russian we have that. So where the entire phrases have to be decomposed into their morphemes, then we have to translate them and try to put them together on the other side.
So is it the text comes first, speech to text, and then it decomposes and then recomposes?
Yes.
Right? It doesn't really anticipate like human interpreters do.
Well, let me say it like this. Yes, in fact, I think we're putting two issues together. The anticipation of the verb is a gigantic problem in German, because if I say, I register for the conference that takes place next week, blah, blah, blah. It says, ich melde mich zu der Konferenz, blah, 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 blah. And whether you registered or canceled your registration is only clear 5 minutes later when the prefix comes, you know. It's anmelden or abmelden. So I melde ab or I melde an. And that, of course, our interpreters will have, I'm sure, a story or two to say about this, because if you're wrong with your guess, so you're guessing, and if you're wrong with your guess, at the end you have to revise your statement and correct the fact. And this is indeed an ability that human interpreters have by understanding the content and then correcting the mistake later on. We cannot do this by machine, and currently what typically happens is the word simply drops off at the end and you're left with something partial. So this is a research issue that remains a research issue that we're trying to deal with. But I'd like to keep in mind also that partially for an interpreter it is also a memory problem. You have to remember potentially 10 minutes of speech before you can produce it. That is not a problem that the machine has, because we can store hours of speech if you like. So indeed, again, we're coming back to the symbiosis. There are certain things that machines are very good at and certain things that humans are extremely good at. And I believe combining and collaborating this way is the way to go.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question? Yes?
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting report, and this is an inevitable development in translation and interpreting, looking at the international processes underway. It seems to me that you're very much focused on technical linguistic components, and there are several issues relating to that. I think it's important that we consider the consequences in the next 5-6 years when you look at the development of machine translation. I thought it was very interesting what you said in the conclusion relating to the motivation of people to study foreign languages. And I think the risk here is that you generate an illusion that it's easy to learn languages. That's a risk on a large scale, and I think that's important when you're discussing with people looking at the development of the world and different foreign languages. So when we're talking about the development of machine translation, we need to talk about what could be the harmonizing tendencies, looking at the mass scale and encouraging people to learn foreign languages. And the other aspect is, what's the use of this? Now, it's clear that machine translation is going to work in a different context. So what's the context which we are going to use machine translation in? How is this going to add to the selection of services which we have today? Of course, this is going to have an effect on the way in which we train the new generation of interpreters and translation to prepare them to work in the new preconditions. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think I agree fully with your comment, first of all. I think the opportunity is clearly interpreters for those situations where it is affordable and practical will continue just as before, because they do a better job, they have a better understanding of the content and the meaning of what is being said. Our machines translate in a rather mechanical way, as you have seen, and they will make mistakes in this way. So they will not be as good, and particularly when the fine word, the detail, the nuance is essential. It is, of course, better done by humans, because humans understand what you're trying to do. They understand the content. And I think there's a great deal of diplomacy and assistance functions, for example. Our human interpreters, even in these humanitarian missions, if a human interpreter there is, people prefer it. Why? Because the human interpreter doesn't function only to interpret, but also as an assistant to understand the culture, to relate the two people to each other, and so on. So human ability is so much broader than what we can do by machines. And if I had to place my bets into how to train in the future, this is where I would go. High quality, and to see this in the context of the entire mission and the entire work that is being done. Now, for routine things, your morning newspaper and TV and things like that, where it's clearly not affordable to do this on a daily basis by human interpretation. In our universities, if I told our president that we wanted to have 10 human interpretations for every lecture, they would laugh me out of their office. It's impossible to do. And so in this sense, it generates an opportunity for the rest of us, for those of us to even understand, to get a glimpse of what is being said. And back to the learning question also, we do not believe that it actually eliminates language learning. You learn a language when you're interested in someone's culture. And you learn when you get interested in someone's culture if you go there. So if you don't understand, you don't go, because it's frightening to be in another place where you don't understand the language. So if you communicate and you understand, and we have evidence that that is actually happening, when people go with devices into a country and they understand a little bit about people, they begin being interested in learning about their culture and their language. And this is what we hope to achieve.
Elisabeth Krohn de Arte.
Je vais m'exprimer en français.
I'll speak French. Spoken language is very different from written language. There's emphasis, there is the music of a sentence. I interpret a lot from German. So, you know, you could talk about the intonation used in a spoken sentence to determine whether or not there's going to be a negation at the end. And you don't seem to take any account of that. You're doing all this translation as if it were a written text, carefully drafted. Perhaps that's where the solution might be found, in that other dimension.
So a very good point. And first of all, just to even make you aware of a problem that is even more trivial than this, is the hesitations are one of those things that we for machines find excruciatingly difficult, and no human has difficulty. If I recorded your telephone conversations with your family and tried to transcribe them, you were to read that transcript with zero error, perfectly correct, you would think that people were drunk who produced this, because it is full of stutterers, repetitions, false starts, and so on. And in our minds, we filter this immediately, and it doesn't even appear. So producing readable text is actually an enormous problem. Now, that said, on top of it is just like what you said, the enunciation, the pronunciation, the melody of the sentence that generates additional challenges. We use a little bit of this, for example, to find places where the periods should go and to get some sentence structure into it. But that is indeed another problem, another layer and level of complexity that we are doing research on, but by no means are finished with. In other words, how do you get the nuance and the emotion of a sentence? How do you get the drama in a lecture and a presentation, right? We're not there yet. So again, view all of this as a mechanical way of producing a tool for the rest of us to get the gist, to get the idea, even though we really don't get the drama and the full impact of human speech.
I would suggest that we just take two more questions, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. Sally Bailey from the Council of Europe.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I've understood that this, would only apply in a different context and in different situations. But there's one context, one situation that you've presented where I wonder whether the use of machines is actually not harmful. And it's the humanitarian crisis situation where you're trying to get people who have been traumatized, who have been, hurt, physically hurt, to speak to doctors. How can you get a child to speak to a doctor through a machine? Doesn't it actually, in fact, hamper communication. And so interpreters are so important for communication facilitation that I would have expected that in a situation like that, you would not want to use a machine.
I'm very glad you raised that question, because we had that same concern and fear. And there are two things that happened. One is we began using monolingual local people who acted as facilitators or as assistants. So you are right that if an American Marine stands in front of a poor lady in Thailand, it is a daunting view, and that it is intimidating. But again, we have Thai people or Cambodian people who work with the people, but they are also monolingual. So you can find assistants who understand the culture, and it is then the conversation between the foreign doctor and that monolingual local assistant that is done by machine. So we have that in many situations. The second point I'd like to make, we were actually very surprised about what you said, is I have traveled the world on all of these exercises. I go myself, and one of our biggest fear is, are they afraid speaking into a microphone and a device like this? It turns out no. They don't have healthcare, they don't have glasses, they don't have, they come to get multiple bottles of Tylenol, but they all have cell phones. And so you go into the world, the cell phone is so pervasive nowadays, and it's increasing, that talking to a machine is not a strange thing for the people over the world anymore. So I believe that the world is changing in this way, that fears and problems of that nature, in fact, are gradually fading away.
Muchas gracias. Y la última.
Thank you very much. Last question in this panel will be from Mr. Skowronski.
Speaking Polish. Chciałbym serdecznie I would like to congratulate you on this excellent presentation, and I'd like to express a conviction that this kind of interpretation or interpretation will have many applications across the world and is very useful. But I'd like to draw your attention to one social aspect, as in the case of the Belize system, where very often the system is not used properly, and it is replaced. And it is used instead of simultaneous interpreting. And also in this case, for our profession, what is important is a mission. We have to explain to the world that the applications of those systems are limited, and they cannot replace human translators or interpreters in this case.
Yes, I have no argument with your comment. I agree fully. And we make that point all the time. I made it in this presentation. It only leads to disappointment if we believe and we transmit and give the idea that all the technical problems are solved and that it will generate a perfect understanding. And I don't think that is actually really happening in the exercises that we attend. There are usually human interpreters there, but they are not large enough in number. So in some of the pictures you saw in these exercises, there are usually something like 5 or 10 interpreters part of the group, and they're doing that. Some of them are hired locally. They're not nearly as expert as what you do here, so you might have even issues with the quality of their interpretation. Nevertheless, the human doctors prefer them because of their cultural understanding and their whole integration of all of that. But again, with those interpretations, it's not enough, and so the routine things tend to get done. So we use some of these devices, for example, at the triage station, right? There's no deep conversation going on there. It's just simply sending people to the right doctor. And in those situations, machines are perfectly fine, and the people really don't feel bothered by it, and it is a tool, really, a means to an end, and again, an example of that symbiosis that I'm talking about. You employ and deploy the human interpreter where it really matters, and let the routine stuff to be done by the machine.
Bien, pues.
Fine, well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you to Dr. Weibel for a fascinating presentation.